So hopefully you were able to create your first project. We're going to go over a brief tour of Xcode right now so you can kind of get used to what some of these panels are doing. We're not going to get to everything in this video, but we'll be covering quite a bit. So I recommend clicking through all these elements, even if you're just kind of sitting there, all right, well, this doesn't seem too complicated. Actually clicking on these elements will help you gain that muscle memory to remember, okay, this is what this thing does when I click on this element, and these buttons will seem a little bit less scary. So the first thing I recommend you do is use the drop down here. Now, if you have a device selected and you have a developer account, notice that it says no signing identity found. Right now in my project, that means I haven't hooked up my developer account to this project yet. And you will have the option to deploy this to your own device. Okay? But for this course, we're going to stick with the simulator for as much as possible. So we have a bunch of different devices here. I know the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus are the brand new iPhones, but we're going to be sticking with the 5S for the beginning parts of this course, just because so many of the screen sizes before the new iteration of the iPhone were set to the same width. So deploying to the 5S, obviously the same. And then the 4S and the 4, the 4 doesn't appear in this list, but the 4S also has the same screen width. So we're going to be sticking with the 5S for a lot of this. We will be showing you how to deploy to multiple screen sizes, absolutely, in the future. So you'll know how to do that, but for right now, that's not on the list of items to do. So if we press on the little plus button, or the play button up here, excuse me, not plus, play, in the upper left-hand corner, it says build, then run the current scheme. And what this is going to do is it's going to launch my application here. I'm going to see Postcard. That's going to be my launch view there. And it's just going to show me a blank screen. And that's because I set up a single view application and it just created a single view for me. Once my application is running, is press the stop button and go back to my iPhone simulator here. And hopefully this will look a lot like the iPhone screen you're familiar with. We can go over here. There's multiple panels here. We have access to Maps, HealthKit, which is brand new. We're going to have an application where we show you how to use HealthKit. And our application Postcard now appears here. We could delete it if we wanted to. We don't want to do that right now. We could also, hold on, let's rerun our application here and just press stop. Because it was, we were held down there. Let's press on settings and we can go to general. We can see that we have access to languages, so we could change this to a different language if we were testing, will my application deploy to French properly. We also have access to, privacy, all these different elements, Facebook, Twitter, so you can input your credentials here. So the simulator is going to work a lot like a regular iPhone. There's obviously some limitations. One of the big ones is we don't have a camera, but we do actually have a camera on our device. So when we build our camera application, we're going to figure out how to get around that. But if we look at photo and camera, we can see that we also have options for this as well. And basically, we're going to be able to use the simulator to test our applications to see if they're working properly. We're going to be able to do that right on the screen here. Now, one of the big errors people seem to have with this simulator, sometimes it doesn't launch properly, sometimes the keyboard won't work. You can always go to iOS Simulator and go to Reset Content and Settings. And I have to do this quite often. It's a real pain to do. But if for some reason you have some issue with the simulator, I recommend doing this first and then try rerunning your application. So just reset contents and settings, reset, and then you can rerun your application. So it's going to be something you're just going to have to do until Xcode fixes the bugs with the simulator. And there are some bugs with the simulator right now. So going back to our project here, let's continue going through the different elements that were generated for us. We also saw this middle postcard thing here, and you might say, okay, what is that? Well, this is just a schema. We're not going to be touching schemas for quite a while, if at all. But we can change the schema here. You can edit the schema, you can create a new schema, and kind of determine how this thing should run if you need to. Now, the default's going to work fine for us, so we don't need to touch that. In the left side here, we see there's a bunch of different tabs here, and actually if we hover over them, we're going to see Xcode tells us, the name here, Find Navigator, Issue Navigator, and this hopefully will give you an idea of what type of navigator we're looking at. Now, the most common one we're going to be looking at is the Project Navigator, which is the far left one here, And this shows us our file structure. Now, when our Xcode projects compile, it's actually a flat file structure, so it doesn't matter kind of the order and what groupings we use. But it's really nice to group things visually as we're developing our applications, and this is the default structure that Apple sets up for us. So we have a bunch of files in here. We can click on the carets here to open and close these groupings. And we see that we get something called the app delegate here. And this is just a file that sets up some code that figures out and alerts us when our application opens or closes, if the user presses the home button or reopens our application. And we're not going to be doing anything in here for quite a while. We also get to this viewcontroller.swift file, and this is going to be the code that manages the default view Apple sets up, and that default view can be found in our storyboard. Now, sometimes, depending on your screen size, you're going to find that this is quite small. So I often will go to the far right-hand corner here in the upper right-hand corner and close these panels out, right, to give myself a little bit more space to look at the view here, the views inside of my storyboard. So opening and closing these, I recommend you just do it a few times in case, for some reason you don't see this far left-hand panel or this far right-hand panel. That's the reason, right? You've clicked these buttons. We also have this image.exe assets. We're going to be able to set up our app icons here. So, what should the little icons that show up on the actual device look like? For our application, we're also going to be able to set up, launch images in our launch screen.zip file, which is really cool that they've added this as well for us. Now, we also have something called the supporting files. We have info.plist. We can set up some additional options for launching our application. You only really usually adjust this when you're doing something with an API or when you're deploying it to the App Store. There are obviously other reasons to adjust the info plist, but we won't be touching this for quite a while. We have tests in here. We're not going to be writing tests for quite some time, but it automatically is generating our project with tests. And we have this products. This is our target here. And we're often going to be adding files and adding them to the target postcard.app. Again, we won't be doing that for quite a bit, but we will be adding some images to our product. So we're going to want to use this target in the future. If we just click through these items here, we're not going to be touching the majority of these, but there are a few I want to point out. The first one is the Find Navigator, and this is really cool because it allows you to search for any line of code or any phrase inside of your entire application. So if we do a search for something like View Controller, and we are able to see in here that there's 3 places where View Controller is written, and we can just click on these, and it shows us the line of code. So it's really useful if you are trying to find something in your code, you just don't know where it is. Now, if there's some sort of issue with your project, this will appear here. Warnings or compile errors, right? Warnings, you're still able to run your application. Compile errors are a hard break and your application won't run at all. Test Navigator, for working on some tests here, you'll be able to look at them here. This shows us how our application's running, right? How much memory it's consuming, what percentage of the CPU is using as well. This is our breakpoint navigator. So if we add some breakpoints, which pauses our code, it would appear here. We'll talk about breakpoints in the future. And finally, we can take a look at the report navigator, which will tell us when we ran it, when we built it, and we can kind of see a list of what we've done with our application inside of our project. So the final thing we want to do here is we want to take a look at this upper right-hand corner. And what we're going to be specifically looking at is the assistant editor. And the assistant editor, I'm just going to open up the project navigator again, is a really cool way that we can take a look at 2 files side by side. So if we click here, we can switch this to the view controller, our first one, and then we can see another folder side by side. If we use the drop down here, we can choose which file to open up. Let's say we want to take a look at the view controller side by side. And we're often going to be connecting elements up from our storyboard to another file. So we're going to be using this assistant editor quite often. If you have a really big screen size, maybe you're using a big iMac, it's really cool to be able to see 2 classes simultaneously as well if you're working in 2 different classes. So the assistant editor is really cool. They chose a tuxedo here for the assistant, I suppose. If you want to go back to single view, all you have to do is select standard editor, and that will bring you back to the single view. The final panel I want to show you is this bottom item that you can open up here. And this is going to be the area we use most often. It's going to be the console. And if you have some errors or if you print out some information from your computer program and you want to see the output, it'll often appear here. So you can open and close this depending. Now, all of these panels you can kind of stretch just by hovering and dragging, right? So if you need some more space to work with, it's really common to go ahead and drag these to give yourself a little bit more space to work with.